Welcome, fans, to another episode of The Thoughtful Bro. I'm so excited for today's fabulous guest. His name is Nathan Hill, author of The Knicks and Now Wellness, and the recent Oprah Book Club pick. So he is on the precipice of, before he was just sort of like US famous. Now he's going to about to be world famous. Maybe he was world famous before. Anyway, but we'll get to Nathan in a moment. A few words before we get started. The Thoughtful Bro streams every Tuesday at 2 on A Mighty Blaze. We're here to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. A Mighty Blaze, for anyone who doesn't know, was an initiative that's all volunteer. We started during COVID to connect writers with readers who love them virtually. And we are not asking for any money at the Mighty Blaze. Still, we are not. And if you want to just show us the love, all you got to do, tell your friends about us, tell your parents about us, tell your kids about us, like us, follow us, all the things. If you are in the mood to spend money, though, I have an idea. Open up a new browser tab and order one of these babies. Wellness is a fantastic book by one of our great young authors of literary fiction. It's about marriage, it's about midlife, and most of all, it's about the stories we tell ourselves to stay sane and to stay well. So Wellness, folks, that is the book that's going to be the toast and the talk of the fall. Regarding questions, post them in the comments, and we will get to them at the end. A little bit of a bio now. Nathan Hill is originally from Iowa, and today he lives in Naples, Florida. His best-selling debut novel, The Knicks, was named the #1 book of the year by Audible and Entertainment Weekly, and one of the year's best books by the New York Times, The Washington Post, NPR, Slate, and many others. His second novel, Wellness, is also a New York Times bestseller and has, as I said, been selected by Oprah Winfrey for her book club. His novels have been published in more than 24 languages. And let's take a moment and hear what some of the rapturous praise is for Wellness. The Washington Post wrote, "The beauty of Hill's second novel is that every character is at least a little strange and no one is unworthy of sympathy. Few recent novels harbor as much love for humanity as this one does. It spares everyone." Publishers Weekly said, "This stunning novel of ideas never loses sight of its humanity." And NPR, taking the cake, said, Wellness is a perfect novel for our age, filled with deep awareness of the internet-poisoned, market-driven, engineered emptiness of modern times, but also compassionate optimism about our ability to find and maintain love nonetheless. It's a monumental achievement, a masterpiece by an author who has, in the space of 2 novels, become indispensable. Wellness is beyond remarkable. Doesn't get much better than that. Nathan, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Hank, that's a mic drop moment there. I feel like I just need to leave. There's no way I'm topping that.
It was remarkable. It was quite remarkable. Well, Nathan, I'm so happy to have you here. This is
Thanks
a
for
whirlwind
having
moment.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's a whirlwind moment for you. I mean, Oprah is like posting video clips of you like every other day, it seems. You're sort of right in the middle of the talk of the town for literary fiction right now. And I guess I just want to start there because it doesn't happen to many people. And there is this like now legendary video of you on a Zoom with your publisher and Oprah just pops in. Can you just like, A, tell us about that moment? And B, tell us how you kept that moment a secret for like 6 months.
Oh my God. Yeah. The moment it's one of those like moments in like extreme humility, because I was actually kind of in a bad mood right before it happened. Like my publisher had sent me, this request for a meeting at like a Wednesday at 2:00. And I had some unimportant thing going on at the time. It was like a tennis practice or something like that. And I was like, well, what's the agenda for this meeting? And they were like, oh, nothing. We just thought we'd touch base, And in my experience, in this business, when people want to have a meeting and won't tell you what it's about, it's usually bad news. So like immediately I'm just like, what's happening? Are they dumping me? Is there something going on? And I was like, well, wanting to prolong the misery, I was like, no, I'm busy at that time. And they're like, fine. I did not know that was the only time Oprah had available, and she was like waiting for me. I did not know that because they wanted to keep it a surprise. So like they were like, how about Friday at 3:00? So I'm like, great, Friday, 3 o'clock. And then I get a text at 3, gonna have to bump you to 4. I was like, okay. And then at 4, gonna have to bump you to 4:30. And I'm like, oh no, I am the last meeting on a Friday late afternoon. Like this
You're
is really
fired.
bad. Right, right. And then I get on the Zoom call, and instead of the whole publishing team being on there, there's only one person. And she says, can we record this for all the people who can't make it? So I'm like, not only am I getting shunted to the end of the day, they're not even showing up to the meeting. And I'm just like, how unimportant can I be? And as soon as I say, yes, let's record, suddenly Oprah takes over the screen, and she's got a physical copy of my book. I didn't even have a physical copy of the book at that time. So I don't even know how she got it. And she starts saying really nice things, and that she wanted to put the book on her book club. And we talked for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or something like that. And I was trying to like recover from the shock of the moment. It was such a switch in emotions, and then we had to keep it a secret until the pub day. So it was really funny. For 6 months, people would ask me like, how do you think the book's, how you feeling about the book? You think it's going to do okay? And I just have to like just be like, I hope, yeah, I think it'll be fine. We're feeling good. Like the early readers have been positive, just like really generic things, and just try to like change the subject because I didn't want to screw it up.
Oh my God. So this is just so amazing. I love that you had to be like, yeah, I think it's going to go fine. You never know in publishing.
You never know.
But so I love the video. We put a link to that video when Oprah surprises Nathan in the chat. And I encourage you to watch it after, of course, this interview is over. But I would just say that like you rarely get to see a moment where somebody's life is entirely changed. In the best of ways, but you get to see it in that video. So it's an amazing document that way. But also I'm just sort of scribbling down, like, so the next time my publisher calls me, so was it Wednesday at 2 and Friday afternoon might be Oprah. Is that it?
Might be Oprah. She apparently has some free time on those 2 days.
Okay. All right. Well, look, let's talk about like the actual book now. Just give us the standard. What is the book about?
Oh yeah, the book is about a couple. It's about Jack and Elizabeth, and Jack has come from the rural plains of Kansas to be an artist in Chicago. Elizabeth has come from an old money, wealthy family in New England. She's come to Chicago. They're both escaping the dysfunction of their families, and they meet in Chicago's kind of gritty underground indie music scene in the early 90s, and they meet each other and immediately fall in love. It's a kind of Romeo and Juliet, love at first sight kind of moment for them. And then very quickly, the book fast forwards 20 years, and we meet them. They've been married for a long time. They have a son who presents certain challenges. They're lonely. They're overwhelmed, and they're looking back at those kind of hopeless romantics that they used to be back in the 90s, and they're kind of wondering how can those people also be us. And then the rest of the book is kind of an excavation about like where they how they got here, and also a few hijinks along the way as they try to recover what they feel like they've lost.
Yeah, the way that I've heard you describe it, which really resonates with me, is this idea of like, what if Romeo and Juliet didn't die? Mm-hmm. And then you just catch up with Romeo and Juliet, like trying to find a house and pay a mortgage 20 years later. Like, what would that look like? And I think ultimately this is you're entering with this book a genre which has like a grand tradition, which is the unhappy suburban marriage. I mean, this is a tradition that for me includes Anna Karenina. It includes a lot of John Updike. I mean, your book is very different from those books, but it is, I think, one of the richest grounds for literary artists to kind of rove around in.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we're familiar with two different, very different love stories. Like we're familiar with the meet cute story, the Romeo and Juliet story, the rom-com story, where we're rooting for the couple to get together. We're also familiar with the Marriage on the Rock story, the midlife crisis story, where we're rooting for the couple to stay together. And I guess what I wanted to investigate was how those two interacted with each other, if they were in the same story, if the meet cute and the midlife story contained each other, and how would they speak to each other. And like my thoughts about Romeo and Juliet was like, if they moved away, moved to the suburbs, had a family, and like what if Romeo, I don't know, was kind of a rotten dad, and one of Juliet didn't like her job, and they'd look back, we're freaking Romeo and Juliet. Like, what happened to us? And in some ways, like, if they couldn't grow beyond the famous story of themselves, it would in some ways be limiting, and so yeah, so I was just kind of wondering, what if somebody had this fabulous meet cute and then just ended up like the rest of us? Like, what would happen?
I love that. We're freaking Romeo and Juliet. Let's
Yeah.
go. um, but yeah, I mean, there is a lot of gas in the tank after that first chapter. I mean, it is such a beautiful first chapter. It is such an energetic, it's an ecstatic first chapter. There's this one, there's many passages that I love, but there's this one that I particularly love where they list for each other their favorite things in life. And just to name a few, it's like back rubs. They're going back and forth, like back rubs, hot showers, the first sip of water when you're really thirsty, the first sip of coffee in the morning, the smell of dryer exhaust, which was a totally particular and great one. But I mean, the list goes on for like a page, and it's like this kind of compendium of like contemporary joy. And I loved it. And for one of the interesting things about that first chapter, and you often talk about this, is how that was a story that you wrote basically 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, and like to write that ecstaticness of like early 20 something love. I also had to go back to my old journals, like the stuff that I was writing about my own life when I was that age and like experiencing love for the first time, and just how overwhelming it feels, and how like sappy you immediately become. I had to like go back and find that person within myself, and yeah, and that first image that they have of each other. So we see them as they're looking at each other across an alley. They have windows that face each other, and that was a short story I wrote a very long time ago, when I was about that age. I was in my mid 20s. I was living in New York City. I just moved there. I had this tiny studio apartment, and the window looked out to this wall of other windows. And I just had this vision of these two people glimpsing each other across the way and slowly falling in love. And then they finally do meet each other for the first time, and they have this ecstatic first date. And the fun thing about that list that you just described is that they're it's ecstatic, but also they don't yet realize that they are not quite right for each other. Like, one of her favorite things is like the violin solo from Scheherazade, and he responds to that by saying "Rage Against the Machine," and they're quite different, but they're looking past that at this moment, and she says something about like lobster rolls, which is a New England staple, and he says something about like tater tots with mayonnaise, and because he's from the Midwest, and so you start to see the differences there, but they're not seeing it. They're just so wrapped up in this like rapturous moment that they're looking way beyond any possible friction that might come later.
Well, the world needs more rapturous moments. So thank you for bottling that one up. And so any book that is being called a masterpiece by NPR is going to draw up a lot of comps. And so I just want to talk for a moment about the comps this book is getting. And I have one that I will reveal momentarily. But a lot of people say it's very much a kind of like the way we live now kind of book, like a big book about the kind of surveying contemporary life. People compare it to Franzen. They often add this almost universally, they add this caveat. It's like Franzen, but with heart. And you also get some Knausgaard in terms of the sense in which it kind of like the detail of the minutiae of like domestic life. And I mean, on that note, I thought there's a very big important moment in the book that happens on November 4th, 2008. And I was like, wait a second, I think something else happened on that day. And indeed, that was when Barack Obama got elected. And I just thought it was so interesting that that Obama doesn't come up in the book at all. It's just like the whole thing is focused on what is going on in this very concentrated domestic situation. Anyway, with all that said, Nathan, what comp resonates with you?
That's such an interesting question, because I feel like I wasn't out to try to do a marriage story like I've seen before. I really wanted to do a different kind of love story. That said, I mean, I love Lauren Groff's Fates and Furies, and I love, the twist that happens halfway through that book where we kind of change perspectives and start re-seeing some things that we thought we knew. And that was definitely on my mind as I wrote this one. That there are a lot of stories that sort of get upended, and you think you know what's happening, you think you're on stable ground, and then suddenly that ground is recontextualized, and you realize, oh no, I was entirely wrong about that thing. So definitely that maneuver in Fates and Furies was on my mind, and also just Lauren Groff is a beautiful, beautiful writer. I love the Franzen comparisons. I will not argue with that. I'm a big fan of his. But like honestly, like if I'm just talking about like what is an influence on me, not necessarily on like how this book is structured, but just like how I approach the page. I think it's this weird combination of, do you know Donald Barthelme, the short story? Yeah,
One of
his
my
short
favorite
story.
writers, and he never
Great.
comes up. Nobody ever talks about him.
I
But
love
go,
him
yeah,
so much.
yeah.
I love him so much. Mostly his short stories. So like his collections, 60 stories and 40 stories are among my favorite books, and I just love how he is able to be smart and perceptive, but also silly and absurd and really funny. Like I encountered him in college, and up till that point, I had not, read a book that I had been assigned for school that made me laugh once,
Mm.
And I encountered Bartlemy, and I was like, oh my God, you can be funny? This is allowed? You can be funny in literature? Like, I did not know that was part of the game. So he's a big deal for me, and I love trying to do what he did, which is try to match a feeling of trying to match something that's smart but also absurd and like takes itself seriously but not incredibly seriously at the same time, if that makes sense. And then the other one for me is Virginia Woolf. Like I reread the first 50 pages of Mrs. Dalloway probably once a
Mm.
year, and like I just love how she captures the drama of just a mind doing its stuff, just thinking and worrying and doing those things that we all do, but making it dramatic on the page. I think she's the best at it, and so I write usually from a very close third person where I really want to have a lot of access to a character's thoughts, and that's basically because of Virginia Woolf's impact on me.
I love this constellation of influences. It's so particular and unique, and it makes so much sense. Thank you for that. Now, I have one more for
Yeah.
you. So, one of my favorite short stories ever, and indeed, in the opinion of Vladimir Nabokov, the greatest short story ever written, is called "The Lady with the Dog" by
Oh
Anton
yeah.
Chekhov.
Yeah.
And there's an ending of the ending of that short story, I think is worth exploring just for a moment and comparing it to the ending of your first chapter. So just briefly, let me set this up. And then, of course, I want to get your reaction. But so The Lady with the Dog, for people who haven't read that story, and we'll put a link to that story in the chat. It's about this couple that begin having an affair. And then at the end of the affair, they realize that they're really in love and they're going to make a go of it. Okay. And the great thing about this story is that it seems like the whole story has been a struggle for them to commit to each other and to see if the relationship would actually be consummated. And then now that it has, there's this sort of twist ending. And the twist ending goes like this. This is the last paragraph of that story. And it seemed as though in a little while the solution would be found and they would lead a new and splendid life. But it was clear to both of them that they still had a long, long road before them. And the most complicated and most difficult part was just beginning. And I think that's like one of the great short story endings ever. And it just kind of is like, oh, well, now we're in love. Well, now what? And then here, I just want to read the ending of the first chapter of your book. He sleeps that night entwined with her in her little bed, and the next night, and the next night too, and for countless nights thereafter, for the rest of the year and the next many winters, and all the baffling time to come. And first of all, I love that word baffling in there. But I just want to say there's a lighter touch and it's like a slightly more optimistic note in your work. But the two works are doing the same thing. It's sort of hinting at like, we've done it. We're together. We're united for life. But now we got to live a whole life together, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love that comp. And like and the character needs to be more than just the lady with the dog, like she has this full, this full life that her lover is not quite yet aware of. And I think that's kind of what Chekhov is motioning towards there at the end. That's a really perceptive comp, one that I wasn't thinking of consciously at the time, but that now that you describe them both in close proximity, I'm like, oh yeah, that's obviously obviously a very similar maneuver. And yeah, I just thought, like, we all love romance stories. Like, we all love, true love stories, and yet there's something about the kind of romantic kind of courtship, like will they or won't they kind of story that then ends, and the real relationship you don't really see that very much in drama or in literature until there's a crisis, and I guess what I was kind of interested in is what happens in all those little moments between the meet cute and the crisis. There's this old this old thought experiment that I was thinking about at the time. It's called the Ship of Theseus. It was first described by Plutarch, I think, in one of his histories. And the story goes like this: like, the hero Theseus returns to Athens victorious, and every year thereafter, the Athenians take his ship out for a sail in celebration. But then every year, as time goes by, like, little pieces of the ship have to be replaced. So an oar here, a plank here, a mast there, and like after like a couple centuries of this, pretty soon every piece of the ship of Theseus has been replaced. So no bit of the original ship remains anymore. And so the thought experiment is, do we still call this the ship of Theseus? Is it the same ship, even though everything's been replaced? And like my thinking my thinking in this book was like, we're all kind of like that ship. Like, we all make little changes here and there. People are like that ship. Marriages and relationships are like that ship. Neighborhoods are like that ship. Countries are like that ship, where it's like the changes seem small until you see them in aggregate, and then everything has changed. And so that's sort of what I was thinking about with this book. That we get to the end, the kind of Chekhovian end of the first section, and then, like, what are the little changes along the way that end up creating this very large change that we then see 20 years later.
And this marriage that you portray and that you have sustained interest in fictionally for 6-7 years now, and that you explore not only in the present, but you go backwards in time and explore, the marriages of their parents and so on. You have been clear that this is not autobiographical. And I thought it was just sort of hilarious in your acknowledgments. You're like, thank you to my wonderful, beautiful wife for putting up with me and having to always answer the question, is this disastrous marriage your marriage? But so my question, aside from the humor of that, my question really is, though, like, how do you sustain interest, or why did you sustain interest? What activated you for 7 years writing a book about a marriage that isn't yours?
Yeah, and it's funny. Sometimes I would be like in the midst of writing these two characters, and I would be in a headspace of trying to create the sort of tension of a marriage on the rocks, and then I'd be done writing for the day and walk out into the living room, and my wife would be there, and she's like, "Hey," and I would have to remember that I'm like, I am not myself in that marriage, even though my body feels like it is, because that's just, you got to go to that place when you're writing it, and there would always be this like moment of transition. She could see it on my face. She's like, "I'll give you a second."
I'll give you a second, yeah. Jack.
Right, exactly. What kept me interested in it was because I felt like this marriage story was a container for a lot of the things that I was sort of worried about at the time. So I started writing this around the time when people that I thought I knew pretty well started kind of separating into their own fact universes, like on Facebook. And this is we're all kind of aware of this now. This is, I'm not saying anything new, but when I first started writing this, it was new, where somebody that I thought was a reasonable dude suddenly started posting on Facebook, like the most kind of insane things, about I don't know, swine flu, or the Mayan apocalypse in 2012, or what have you, and started really believing some of the stuff they were reading online, and then age where it was like all of my friends were suddenly like doing these, like had these like life hacks that struck me as sort of dubious. I was like, really, like crystal therapy, is that really a thing? And then you're spending how much on it? Like, but then again, I didn't feel like it was my place to like criticize any of that, but it just felt like everybody had like, we're living by all of these stories, and we couldn't agree on the right story, and or on the same, I should say, the same story. And so I was just, it was interesting to me. It was bothering me. I was worried about like the fracturing of not only like our political culture, but just my group of friends, and acquaintances in town. And I guess I was just searching for a container for those worries, and I discovered that a marriage story and a love story is full of fantasy. It's full of delusion. It is full of projecting the life you want onto somebody else. And so I thought, well, here could be a sort of Trojan horse for a lot of the things that I'm thinking about right now, about the kind of slow creep from reality that I feel like I've witnessed uh, uh, a few times with friends or acquaintances or family members that were close to me, and so yeah, so that really sustained it. I think like just it became a way for me to try to figure out not only what was going on, but also how to relate to certain people in my life.
Mm. Yes. And I will also say that one of the things that this book captures, and I think you and I are roughly about the same age, but like kind of people in their mid 40s or so. And there is this way that you end up demographically in something of a lockstep with all of your friends. It's like, okay, we all graduate college around the same time. The next step is everybody gets married. The next step is everybody goes to the suburbs. The next step is everybody has their kids. The next step is everybody gets divorced. And then it's like, and it's like,
So
it's,
true.
but it's like, it's like, not like everybody's divorced, but but all the divorces came in waves. Like, for example, like
Hmm.
I'm like a little bit past that now, and I hardly hear of any divorces anymore.
Hmm.
But it would be like 5, 6, 7 years ago, my wife was getting a call like every other night, like,
Yeah.
guess who's getting divorced now? Guess who had an
Hmm.
affair? And
Yeah.
so on. And anyway, you talk in the book about this kind of U shape of human happiness, and how, like, people are happy in their youth and their old age, but in the middle, which is like right about this age, like in
Yeah.
your early 40s, where like all the pressures of the world are upon you and families start to break up. And it was just an interesting capturing of like that moment of breakup kind of demographically.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And like it was so shocking to me because I had, I had I met this group of people in my early 30s, and we all fell in, and just we became such close friends, these several other couples, and that we would party together and travel together and like have dinner parties together, and I made the mistake mentally of thinking, I've found my tribe. This will never change. This is now life, and I was so happy about it. And then, everybody started, having kids and sometimes twins, and suddenly they were in the weeds, and we didn't see them anymore. And then they made friends with people at their kids' schools, and we saw them even less. And they didn't have any time for those dinner parties or cocktail parties or whatever. And other friends moved away for work, and other friends just changed and kind of moved along. And I remember suddenly feeling like looking at this group 10 years later, I was like, oh my God, I feel all alone, and and yeah, it happens. And I realized part of it was my mistake, that I kind of thought once you achieve those big beautiful life things, like you find love and marriage, family, and a community, it's just like, okay, great. Now I've worked all of my 20s and part of my 30s to find this, and now I found it, and it's just smooth sailing, and it is not.
It's
It's
like that's when the
still,
story
yeah.
begins in a way,
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's almost as if like every time you find something, that's the beginning of a new story about that thing, and it's going to fall apart. And that's just how the world works. And in some ways the book is embracing like the uncertainty of that, like, and
Mm.
being okay with it, because a lot of the I know a lot of the sadness and a lot of the resistance I had to it was like I didn't want anything to change. I just wanted to keep everything static
Mm.
and keep it in amber, and that's just not how people work.
I just think it's such an interesting thing. And of course, I'm biased because I am about this age. But I just think, like, there's that old saying, life begins at 40. And I don't think that means what I'm about to say. But it's this idea that, like, you know, people, it's the pressure is sort of very strong to get married and to have kids. And it's something that, like, you sort of have to do when you're younger. I mean, you can't find a partner and start a family when you're 60. You sort of have to do it in your 20s
Hmm.
and 30s. But what's so interesting about turning 40 and entering your 40s is, like, once all these big projects are done, right? It's like, well, often hear people like, well, there were trouble in our marriage, so we thought we'd have another kid or have our first kid. And of course, it's like all-time terrible ideas. But the idea is that, like, once you're done having your kids and once you've got a mortgage and you're married and you have your career, it's like that is when, like, the most interesting thing happens, because you're like, this is my life, and do I like it or not? And the characters in your
Yeah.
book discover, oh my God, I can see, like, all the way to the ocean, and I see exactly what's waiting for me, and I don't like it.
Yeah, there's a problem on the other side of striving, which is like once you sort of get what you've been striving for, you're like, well, what now? If that has
Mm-hmm.
defined you, is the search for these things, building these things, finally getting that house, finally, securing the mortgage, finally having a family, finally getting married, whatever. If the striving has been really important, once you get on the other side of it, like, what the hell do you do now? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I know several friends who um, it's it would be inappropriate to call it a midlife crisis, a term that I hate, by the way. It's just more like, I think Elizabeth says it at one point, like, all the big questions have been answered, and now I'm just searching for, like, where's the energy, where's the pizzazz going to come from now? Like, now that I'm not pursuing those questions, what do I pursue? So there's just it's sort of a fumbling around of, like, okay, I still have hopefully many decades on this earth still to go, and how do I fill them, if I'm not striving for these things? Yeah, and so yeah, Jack and Elizabeth are staring that down, and they're staring it down, with a partner that is not quite who they thought they would be. Like, Elizabeth thought that Jack was this passionate guy, but it turns out, like, that passion might have actually been hiding a sort of stubbornness, and, like, Jack thought that Elizabeth was this, like, very intellectual, bookish, curious person, but it might have been true that that intellectualism was hiding a sort of, like, annoying perfectionism in her, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's like the very things that attracted them to each other at the beginning are the things that it's like the obstacle now. And what do you do with that? And it's just, maybe it's just a side effect of knowing yourself better, of being more comfortable in your skin, and so you don't have to put on that facade. And as soon as you don't do that, like, relationships can fall apart that depended on that facade, if that makes sense. So
Oh,
yeah, all sorts of interesting things happen when once you think life is settled.
and I do have a bunch of other questions, and we'll take some questions from the audience too. Just pop them in the chat, folks. But I can't move off this topic without reading what I thought was one of the great passages and kind of summaries of what else is missing from the marriage. Whereas, like, Elizabeth's trying to explain to her husband why she's not as happy anymore, and she says that she is, quote, just no longer seduced by the mystery of it all. Life's big, hard questions. What will happen? Who will I become? These have largely been answered. And now I feel like there's this huge absence where the mystery used to be. And I guess that's what I'm really after. I mean, is this sort of like advice to people having trouble with their marriage? Like, chase some mystery, reintroduce the mystery of life?
Well, the thing that Elizabeth doesn't know, in that when she says that she will discover by the end, is that there are plenty of mysteries left. Like, it is, what's the quote? The Orwell's quote, that seeing yourself clearly is the project of a lifetime.
Mm,
And I think he said that. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that.
it sounds great.
But that sounds great. Anyway, but yeah, that there are still things to learn about yourself, even when you think the mystery is gone. And so yeah, Elizabeth thinks that I figured myself out and I know what I want. And then the project of the rest of the book is revealing to her, no, she didn't have the first clue yet about that. So I feel like there's always something new to learn about the world, about yourself. Like like part of the book is about how our stories should change as the things around us change. I think like we're all human and we want to feel safe and certain in the world. And so we find a kind of position that feels safe and certain and cling to it. And even good ideas, if clung to too rigidly, too ideologically, can calcify into error. And so, it's really a book about, if there's any advice in the book, it's about like, that everyone's going to believe the stories that they believe in. We can't help that, but we can help how we relate to those stories. If we relate to them with curiosity or with humility, then we'll be more prepared for the change that's inevitable.
And this pivots to another thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the title of the book, Wellness, and the relationship between wellness, kind of psychological, spiritual well-being, and belief. And I think one of the major conceits of the book is the fact that Elizabeth works for a wellness company called Wellness that effectively sells placebos. And the brilliant thing that you observe in the book about placebos is that placebos really are just a story. And they're a story that people believe. And the question that Elizabeth brings up many times is, wait, so if it's a story that's curing a person, like you take a pill that says it will make your love life better, and then people actually make their love life better because they believe it, Elizabeth says, well, they had that power all along. Why can't they just self-heal by creating a story that they believe? And I think that like metaphor, if you will, is sort of at the center of the entire book. And I almost thought I love the title of the book, but it could have also been called Belief, because like that is just really what this is. It's about the stories that we tell ourselves. And I just think it's a fascinating observation about human nature.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of placebo researchers prefer the term meaning effect to placebo effect, because your body is not responding to the placebo per se. It's responding to the meaning around the placebo, the story, the aura, whatever it is, the context. And so it's the body's response to finding meaning. And sometimes, yeah, the body can have a big response to that. And it's not entirely different from the way, certain like cognitive behavioral science psychologists or certain couples counselors just try to create a different context for a relationship. Like the story you tell about your spouse is really important. Like if you settle on some kind of story somewhere along the way, as my spouse is the kind of person who X, and then it's possible to just start believing that despite evidence to the contrary. So it's really important to, I think, not settle on stories about the people in your life, because they're going to change as much as you are. But yeah, the placebo stuff was so fascinating to me. Like researching that, I started researching it so that I would be able to write the character of Elizabeth more effectively. And then I just got really drawn into the science and thinking that, what Elizabeth is doing, like creating context and stories to help people heal is not altogether different from like what any unregulated supplement company is doing to us right now anyway. And it's been interesting to hear from readers whether they think what Elizabeth is doing is ethical or not. And I like keeping that as an open question. Like we hopefully you're not quite sure whether she's doing the right thing or not. And I love hearing people's takes on it.
Well, part of what the book discusses in regards to that topic is there's a kind of American obsession right now with wellness. And I just, in fact, got an email from my child's school this morning from like the wellness department of my child's school. And part of the point you make in the book is like, maybe that's a little bit overblown and misguided. And maybe this obsession with wellness stops you from seeing what the truth is, and the truth hurts. And sometimes it's okay to be hurt. And I think it's just basically what I took from the book is there's this sort of razor line that you have to walk between sometimes choosing to believe a story that is more hopeful, and sometimes sucking it up and girding up your loins and accepting that your story is false and adjusting.
Yeah, that's a great reading and a great observation. I I kind of think of certain, wellness practices in the same bucket that I put a lot of, belief in certain conspiracies, which is that it's sort of not very useful to debunk this or that wellness practice or this or that conspiracy. What's more interesting and helpful, I think, is to think about what emotional need those things are meeting. So, somebody needs to believe in a conspiracy because why? It could be because, they want to feel in control in a world that feels out of control. They want to feel like they're an insider and everybody else is an outsider. They want to feel like they have some kind of power or status where if they didn't believe in that story, maybe they wouldn't have it. Why do people believe in certain wellness treatments? Well, it's, like I'm very sympathetic to this. Like the last time I went to the doctor, like I had to like wait, a couple hours, too long in the waiting room and filling out paperwork and triplicate. And then the doctor got to see me for 8 minutes and couldn't remember what she told me the last time and told me all the same stuff and then charged me $200 that I had to fight my insurance company to pay. And that's like just a normal hospital, like a normal like doctor visit in America. And like what a lot of the placebo research shows is that placebo is most effective when the doctor is compassionate, is warm to you, seems to care about you, and makes you feel confident in your treatment. And then you look at all these kind of wellness influencers and grifters online, and that is exactly what they're doing. And so, if some influencer says go on a juice detox and it'll make you avoid all of that nonsense that you have to deal with in the health care industry, that's really, I mean, that's really seductive, and I understand why people would want to believe that. So I guess what I'm saying is just like, stories are a kind of medicine sometimes. And so like, think about the stories, think about the stories that you're believing as much as you think about the chemicals that are entering your body. And like, sometimes the stories are affecting you more than the chemicals are.
It's so well said. And I've just often thought that it's sort of like the most interesting part of the wild beliefs that somebody may have or that I may have is the sort of like value they have as a kind of like a psychological diagnostic. Like, okay, this story is what it is, and you believe this very strange thing. What's most interesting about it is why you believe it and like what the payoff is for you believing that. And then we can like quickly locate what the real issue is.
Right. I think that's exactly right. I think about a friend of mine who really went deep into, a lot of just internet stuff that that ended up being very, very ugly, I thought. And what I knew of this guy, he's an older guy, he's retired. His father, whom he adored and worshipped, was kind of dying right in front of him. He had dementia and he was wasting away. He was divorced. He had a girlfriend that he thought looked promising, but then the girlfriend turned out one day she got arrested for being part of this scheme that he had no idea was happening. So his private world was falling apart. He was feeling like he didn't matter in the culture anymore. His father was dying. And then at that same moment, he starts believing in all of this nonsense and like becoming like sanctimonious online about, whatever. And it just seems so clear to me that like you're looking for something to attach to emotionally that will help you through this really, really hard moment. And I really felt for him, but I couldn't get him to like go towards more healthy forms of healing. Instead, he went towards anger and rage and sanctimony, and that seemed just as unhealthy, but it came from a reasonable emotional place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. You don't have to look far in this country to see people reacting with rage, and embracing strange truths. We're almost out of time. I do want to leave time for a couple questions, but I just want to ask you one last question on my own and like maybe just get a brief answer to this. But it is one of the most, titillating racy parts of this book. There is a large section of this book that takes place in a swingers club. Yeah. And I'm not going to give away what happens there, but I will say I was like, my blood pressure was up. I was like, my heart rate is what I mean. My heart rate was up. I was like on the edge of my seat. I was like reading with one hand over my face like this because suffice it to say that like the relationship is absolutely on the line and the marriage is on the line, and what they're going to decide to do basically in this sex club is going to determine the fate of this relationship. And so what a section that was. Now, my question to you though is just, do these kind of clubs exist? And did you research this, or how do you know about this?
It is a great. It's one of my favorite scenes, and I know that like when I told my wife I'm writing a big pivotal scene in a sex club, she was just like, "Oh, what are people gonna think?" I will say that I mean, this is a marriage story, and I think a lot of people have, especially like cis hetero people like me, have a certain default narrative about what marriage is. But I know people who tell a different story about marriage. I know people who are polyamorous. I know people who have various kind of non-monogamous arrangements. And what I appreciate about them is that they're telling a different story, and they're telling a story that is right for them, that is accommodating what their particular needs, and it's not right for everybody, but it can be right for some people. And I thought, what a great foil for Jack and Elizabeth. Like, what a great, like, I sort of love taking a subculture and placing my main characters in that subculture, because it kind of functions as a sort of acid bath for their beliefs. Like, how can you encounter these other people who live completely differently from you without reevaluating your own thoughts? And then just like putting it in a sex club just added a little more sizzle to the to the scene. It's there's a lot on the line, and I was hoping that people would be really cringing at the beginning of that scene, like, what's gonna happen? So I'm glad to hear that you had that reaction.
Oh my God, it was like some kind of thriller, but it was just everything was on the line, and it just seemed like I'm going to reveal something if I keep talking, so I'm just going to shut up. But what a scene! All right, let's go to a few audience questions, and then we'll wrap here. So, audience question: how do you start your books? With an image, with structure, with character?
Let me see. This book started with that image that's in the first chapter. It was a short story I wrote a long time ago, with the two people staring at each other across the alley, in darkness. So they're both at their windows. They're both waiting for the other person to return, and they're both sitting in the dark, and they don't know it, but they're staring at each other. And I started with that image, which seemed to me both kind of interesting, visually interesting, romantically, but also metaphorically. They are both in the dark, literally in the dark about each other. And then by the end, I won't give anything away other than the last image that we really see of them. They're both in the light, looking at each other. The book is a process of getting them from darkness into lightness. So yeah, I began there with that image, and then you just kind of work on it. Like, I like taking a long time writing books, because I love how, like, the world sort of has, or the story has this magnetic pull towards the stuff of the world, and the story becomes the lens through which I see the world. And so a friend will tell a story to me, and I'll be like, oh, I can totally steal that and use that in the book. I hear something on a podcast, I read something in a book, I see a news story, and like things start sort of attaching to the story, and suddenly it grows and accretes all this meaning and layers that I really, really love playing with. So it usually begins with one simple image or theme, and then I kind of fragment that theme and try to look at it in a lot of different lenses.
Great. Let's do one more quick question. Here we go. Aspiring writers are often told not to market books. Oh, this is good. Aspiring writers are often told not to market books over 300 pages. How did you have the courage to write longer? And how was the submission process for you? So probably that's going back to the Knicks. But I just want to add on top of that, like, the first book was, I think, 700 and change. This one's like 620. I'm also curious on top of this question, like, is there something about that length-ish, 600, 700, that feels like sort of complete to you?
Yeah, I feel like each book is going to be as long as it needs to be. Like neither book did I set out to like I'm going to write a doorstopper. You know, like I that wasn't the plan. I just had a certain story in mind, and that was the length that was required to tell that particular story. So the next book, who knows how long it's going to be. I heard that same advice when I was a beginning writer, when I was in like MFA program, and honestly, I would encourage people to forget about that. Like, write the book. Honestly, write the book that you need to write. And if it needs to be 200 pages, it's going to be 200 pages. If it's 600, it's 600. And like, like when the Knicks went on submission, it was even longer than the published version because I cut it back down with my editor, and it went on submission and sold in a week, and like nobody blinked at the length, and
Mm.
like, we look at the bestseller lists, and A Covenant of Water it has been on the bestseller list for a long time, and it's 800, 900 pages. So I think there's a room for big books, and I honestly think that readers are enjoying getting lost in books, especially since the rest of culture is so sort of bite-sized and throwaway. Like I think
Mm.
that a big book offers a respite from kind of modern, the modern life on our phones. So I don't think readers are afraid of it by any means. But like my biggest advice is just like write the book that you need to write. Write the book that only you can write. I know that when I first moved to New York City to become a writer, I was like trying to write stuff that I thought would please like the New Yorker or the Paris Review, and I was writing stuff that just wasn't me. And besides, the Paris Review and the New Yorker don't care about me, so why am I writing to them? So like I guess I moved away from New York City. I got out of publishing completely, and I was just like, I'm just going to take a swipe at writing the book that I want to write, and that was
Mm.
the Knicks. And it's weird. Once you write the thing that only you can tell, it suddenly like that's the story that becomes kind of universal. Everybody feels like they can relate to it. So yeah, my
Mm.
advice would be like, don't worry too much about like advice that you get about the publishing world. Like, write the best freaking book you can, and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah. By the way, I love how you talk about the New Yorker, and I've heard that before from other writers. Like it's just this refrain, and I felt that way too originally, which is like I was trying to please the New Yorker, and then I just thought, forget it, I'm just going to write what I want to write. I think people have this like weird, like father figure relationship, like bad father relationship with the New Yorker. It's like I was always trying to please him, and it was never good enough for him. Wait, but I just want to say one other thing, just to put it in a sound bite, because that's exactly the thing that you were telling us not to do with long books. But let's just put it very simply to people. So it's okay, fill in the blank here. It's okay to write a 700-page book as long as you just make sure that you
Tell the truth. That you tell the truth. Yeah, yeah. I think that's it. It has to feel true. It has to feel, it has to, like any book. I mean, I will throw away a book or I will stop reading a book that's 280 pages long if it doesn't feel like true, and I will keep going with a book that's 900 pages long if it feels true. So it's got to be telling me something that's important, that's true, that is meaningful to me, and that's it.
That is so beautiful. All right. So, folks, the book is called Wellness by Nathan Hill. If you are not won over by this interview and you haven't bought the book yet, I just don't know. Maybe you're just beyond help. I mean, this is a wonderful interview. And I think it's actually just a taste of actually what's in the book, because your book kind of sprawls in many different directions, talking about not just this couple, but so much else as well. Nathan, I always end the interviews I do with one question, which is this. So just imagine there is an ideal reader for wellness, just the perfect reader for wellness, the reader that you dreamed of, whoever that may be, and just who's kind of receiving the book in just the way that you hoped that it would be received. So just imagine that this ideal reader has just finished, and they close the book and they put it down in their lap and they look out the window. Describe for me in a phrase or even just one word, what does that reader feel?
I can actually tell you a true story about that reader. I met her in Washington D.C. at Politics and Prose. She is an ecologist from the Flint Hills of Kansas, and I write a lot about the prairie and the tall grass prairie and the ecology of that. And then she also revealed to me that she is polyamorous, and she appreciated the stuff that I had to say about that. And and so she just said, she was like, I would just like to say, on behalf of me and all my partners, thank you. And so, like, I guess that's what I would want. Just thank you would be great.
Well, I will join the chorus of people all across America and the world in saying thank you. Nathan, it is such a delight to have you on. I would just say that, like, I sometimes leading up to an interview, depending on who the guest is, sometimes I'm a little bit nervous, or I just, whatever it may be. But I felt such a sense of calm all week looking forward to this interview, because I just knew it would be such a delight to talk to you. And indeed, it has been.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the really thoughtful read. It's like such a pleasure to, like, encounter a reader who has thought so much about the book, read it so carefully. It's really a delight for me. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. Folks, this will post on Friday on the podcast. Thanks everybody for joining today. Wellness by Nathan Hill. It's a fantastic book. And we'll see you next week on Thoughtful Bro. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.